ready? Okay. Alright, so the equator is 0 degrees, hottest place on Earth. And we all just talked about on the board that hot air rises. So when air rises from the surface, you'd expect to have low pressure. And then if you look at the poles, that's the coldest place. Cold air is going to sink and I'm going to have high pressure. On a non-rotating Earth, if the Earth did not rotate, then I would expect air to rise at the equator and sink back down to the poles. So air should flow from the North Pole to the equator and from the South Pole up to the equator. And we would have wind that would just flow one direction. Can wind flow in a straight line? No, and we just did a little activity with the turntable, and we saw that if the turntable is rotating and you try to draw a straight line, it turns into a curve. So if you look at my wind belts here that I haven't even showed you yet, they're definitely not straight lines. But on a non-rotating Earth, you would just have this nice little convection cell. Now look at the side of this. Do you guys remember us doing the mantle convection lab? Does that not look the same? So these are called convection cells. And convection is just a scientific word that is relating to the flow of materials to distribute heat. So I'm distributing heat by the flow of the atmosphere. Alright, so the Earth does rotate, turns out. And so this 2 convection cell model is wrong. What we end up getting instead is 6 convection cells. We have 2 at the equator to 30 degrees. And notice the air is rising like we just talked about because it's hot. And then at 30 degrees north and south, the air sinks, right? So 2 air cells, convection cells, they converge and sink down. And so I have the sinking air, and this is where I'm going to have my major deserts. The Sahara, the Gobi, the Atacama, they're all there. And then, you know, like I said, most of Mexico is in this area. So if you think about the biomes there, you have desert, right? So at 60 degrees north and south, I'm going to have my taiga, my boreal forest, and also in this area you have your coniferous temperate rainforest, right? So Edward and Twilight, like they hang out here because the air is rising and it gives enough precipitation for the giant trees. And then at the poles we just talked about there, cold, we would expect air to sink, so air does sink back down, and so that sinking air is not going to allow for precipitation formation. So I'm going to have this polar desert. Alright, so far so good there? When you go to try to draw this, which you're going to do in a minute, you gotta, if you'll just start with your arrows, up, up, down, down, up, and then one going down to the poles. So again, up, down, up, down. And if you draw your little circles, they should literally be little circles, and they should go in one direction. If they're not going in one direction, you messed up. But if you just start with 2 at the equator and then alternate, you'll be fine. Alright, so if we look at the convection cells, we are not concerned with the atmospheric flow aloft, way up high. We are concerned with what is next to the ground. So basically from 30 degrees north to the equator, the air is trying to go south. You see that? I don't care about this. Ignore that part. Alright, so just the part near the surface. Now, when we name winds, notice these winds are called westerlies. What direction are they coming from? West. The west. So, when somebody moves here from Texas, they live in Georgia, do we call them Georgians? No, we still call them Texans. So just like people, when they move, winds are named from where they're coming from. So notice the northeast trade winds are in fact coming from the northeast, and the polar easterlies are coming from the east. Alright, so that's where these names are coming from. And they match. Polar easterlies, westerlies, westerlies. This is the only ones that are different, and they make sense. Northeast trade winds, southeast trade winds. But they're both trade winds, okay? Now, if we look at them, they are curved because of the Coriolis effect. But how to draw them, that's why I need this little guy. So I actually, on his name tag, his name is Coriolis. He's the Coriolis machine. I borrowed him permanently from a mattress store because I needed something white to write right and left on. So here's his right hand. Now, winds get turned. Raise your hand if you're right-handed. Cool, everybody in the northern hemisphere is right-handed. And if you're left-handed, then I'm sorry. But we're all right-handed. Anybody ever been to Australia? Awesome. Did you know that everyone down there is left-handed? That's true. But south of the equator, turns out that winds get turned to the left of their intended direction. Everything there's over there. And north of the equator, every wind or ocean current gets turned to the right of their intended direction. All right? So this is going to be important as we look at the surface flow and how it directs the winds. So let's just start in the northern hemisphere. Piece of cake, the northeast trade winds. They're trying to go south. So this is the winds. They're trying to go south, right? But they get turned to the right of their intended direction. Dun, dun, dun. You see where that line's coming from? That's cool because you're looking at it and that makes sense. But when I show you this, but what direction does it actually look like they're turned towards? But they're turned to the intended direction to the right of their intended direction. So they're trying to go south. So that's where he comes in. So this one looks right because it's going to the right. But so here's his right hand. They're trying to go north. They get turned to the right of their intended direction. See that? So when you go on and you try to draw this in a second, you're going to look at this surface flow and you're going to think about turning it. And you can actually turn your paper upside down. I can't do that really. All right, so if we look at the polar easterlies, the air is trying to go south. It gets turned to the right of its intended direction. And there they go. Let's go to the southern hemisphere. Left hand. He doesn't want to go to the southern hemisphere, particularly Australia. He doesn't want to get made into boots. Yeah. It was funnier this morning when I made it up. Now I don't have that natural rhythm going. But anyway, left, right? Correct. So the air's trying from 30 degrees to 0. It's trying to go north, but it's going to get turned to the left of its intended direction. And even though it looks like it's getting turned to the right, it's getting turned to the left of where it's trying to go. So here also to the left and to the left. So again, the names match. Northern hemisphere to southern hemisphere, and also they should be, when you want to check yourself when you're done, they should be symmetrical along the equator. How you doing? Pretty good? All right, so what we're going to do, you can stop that.